more important.
Mm-hmm.
That the third one, that's the Buddha.
Right.
And the three paradigmatic individuals are Socrates, Jesus, and the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
The problem of interpreting any of their teachings is that neither of them wrote anything at all, right?
Right.
So anybody who talks grandly about, the Buddha said this is the doctrine of the Buddha, simply is barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Did you talk to the Buddha?
Right.
Did he tell you this? And so, I know that the Pali Canon was written down 5 centuries after the Buddha's text. It was based on oral traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and all three, both Socrates, Jesus, and the Buddha, didn't teach doctrines. Of course, doctrines were attributed to them by people who wrote texts on the basis of insufficient knowledge of Jesus, that they hadn't even met him ever. Right? St. Paul meets him in a vision on the road to Damascus. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he never had any experience. And the Gospels, the Gospel of John was written 120 years after Jesus' death. Well, certainly no one can claim that this is exactly a transmission of what Jesus said. So it's simply silly. So what do these people teach? They teach a way of life, a praxis. Socrates has a praxis, what has been called discursive democracy, right? He questions, he has no, the way Plato and Xenophon present him, there is no statement that you can say, this is Socrates' doctrine. It isn't. He has a praxis of questioning. What other people say. Said, do you really believe this? If you do, then let's examine it. Let's see what this gives, right? Now, the problem with all three teachers, and I include the Buddha because, I don't have to talk about the Buddha, but I think it makes sense because we have a similar configuration there, that all three of them have been dogmatized in the written traditions that were started on the basis of their examples, right? So in the case of Jesus, it's obvious that since he didn't write anything, how can anyone say what he said? Right? Now, I don't doubt, right, that. But you see, one of the things that always struck me about Jesus is the saying from, I forget which of the Gospels, where he says, I am the truth, the way and the life. None shall come unto the Father except by me. Now that means that the truth is in the praxis of Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
And I am the truth. I don't speak the truth. That's not what he said, right? So from the very beginning, there is a falsification involved here in the written transmission of the teachings of these, I call them paradigmatic individuals, because they are paradigms for imitation. And so there is a tremendous falsification involved. So there's a Socratism and a Platonism and a Christianity, all of which are based on written texts, which are inherently falsifications, but which are presented as the absolute truth. Right? Now, in the case of Plato's dialogues, is a bit, the Christians, St. Augustine and others, used Platonic reasoning as they found it in the dialogue in support of their preconceived notions of what is the truth, right? Which they got from their religious traditions, right?
I have 2 questions before we proceed. One is, what do you mean by paradigmatic systems? I know
not
what,
systems, individuals.
Individuals. And also, why these three, and why not, let's say, some of the pre-Socratics who also...
Oh yeah,
they wrote,
I would in...
I mean,
in aphorism 2 or 4 of Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche, I can, if I can find, let me see, where do I get Beyond Good and Evil? He calls them, he mentions, of course, others too.
In one aphorism he mentions Pythagoras with Plato. I don't know if that's the one that you have in mind.
Aphorism 2 or 4 mentions Plato, of course. I have to find it. Let us admit to ourselves how greatly our modern world lacks the whole strain of men like Heraclitus, Plato, Empedocles, and all the other splendid royal hermits of the spirit.
Okay, all right. So he included two
Right.
others in addition to Plato.
Yeah.
Now, going back to my question, paradigmatic individuals.
Morals to follow.
Okay, all right.
For
So
imitation in action.
all right. So they have created some
Ways of life.
Ways of life.
Right.
Okay.
Not doctrines, ways of life. And the ways of life are, of course, transmitted through doctrines. Right. So, like, I would go to the Platonic Phaedrus to understand the relationship between oral teaching and writing, right? And the problematic of writing. Now, I think the reason why Plato wrote dialogues in order to avoid the problems of writing to a certain extent. You can't pin him down. Plato says nothing whatever in his own name in the dialogues. Nothing.
And he doesn't appear in the dialogues.
He doesn't appear in the dialogues.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, this is like, so, and then, for example, in aphorism 191, Plato is referred to as Plato as the 190, what is it, or 191, or let me see, I have it in a different, in 191 Plato, let me see, the Plato, more innocent in such matters and lacking the craftiness of the plebeian, wanted to employ all his strength, the greatest strength any philosopher so far has had at his disposal. Right?
Yeah.
The greatest strength any philosopher so far has had at his disposal. Now, I would say that's very high praise of Plato.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There are other passages as well. In Beyond Good and Evil, he refers to him as someone who tried to study religion, but it failed. There's also with Pythagoras.
Yeah, but he tries to, I think Plato has to be seen, I think, in an agonistic struggle with Homer. The disintegration of Greek culture, which was based on oral poetry, on Homer as educator.
Right.
And he opposes that because it's disintegrating. The Peloponnesian War, one has to realize that the Republic is written in the middle of the Peloponnesian War, a terrible struggle. A war that is in some way similar to World War I and World War II put together. If we understand, if we follow Thucydides' understanding of that war. Now, so now I think what Nietzsche does is, okay, he wants to found, he's in an agonistic relationship with Socrates, Plato, and with Jesus, and with St. Paul. Okay? He wants to found basically a new religion. So he attacks the traditions, the written traditions. So what I think it's important to make a distinction between Plato and Platonism.
Of course, yes. So
he attacks Platonism, no doubt about it. He attacks what he calls Socratism. But the images he constructs are largely caricatures, which have a poetical, rhetorical, political intention, because he characterizes them because they are established as idols in the tradition. Let's say, for example, if we go to the Twilight of the Idols, Götzendämmerung.
Yes.
It's said exactly there, right? The idols that he attacks, these are Götzen. That means they are cultural icons that have served for 2,500 years, and that mostly misinterpreted, used for political purposes, for dogmatic political purposes. I mean, you know, I look at Christianity simply as a system of ruling. That's what it is. The Catholic Church is a power structure.
Powers, yeah.
That's basically what it is. And so Nietzsche attacks this tradition because he wants to, and he has to characterize the idols. And as he says at the How to Philosophize with a Hammer, you hit the statues. If they shatter, okay, fine, that was good. But beware that they don't fall on you, okay? Fine, but if they don't shatter, the hammer functions as a tuning fork. They keep resounding into the future.
Yes, they.
You see, for example, I have here a book on Plato called Platon und die Formen des Wissens, which is, I think, one of the very best things written about Plato in the last 20 years, 30 years. And one of the points he makes, and very, very extensively, is we have now access to Plato again, much deeper level, because of Nietzsche's critique of Platonism. And he goes into the whole I mean, for example, he says Plato never had such a thing as a theory of ideas.
Oh yeah, that's
never had such a thing. There is no such thing. But of course, you can't talk without ideas, without concepts.
Of course, yeah.
You use concepts all the time, but you don't have to dogmatize them. Right? But of course, the Christians, you know, have the need to dogmatize any religion, because people are not equal.
Right.
There are the few who understand, and the many who don't. Who need guidance, who need doctrine, who need to be told, this is the truth, right? This is how it is.
And this is how you should live.
This is how you should live, right? Yeah. But then you still have to practice the living, right? That's why I look at religion much more in the sense of a doing. I have here Sloterdijk's book.
It's on this.
Yeah, okay, I have to go to the bathroom anyhow.
Okay, alright, I'll get. Well, this is Professor Horst Hader. As in his study, we are going to interview him on Nietzsche and Plato. Professor Hader teaches at Concordia University in Montreal. He's at the Political Science Department, and you've been there since
40 years.
So 40 years. And all right. Well, we thank Professor Hader for giving us this opportunity. So why don't we start with the first question, and we can of course deviate from this question. One of the major themes in Nietzsche's works is the way he deals with Socrates, and there are of course difficulties in his critique of Socrates, because Socrates did not write anything. It's all recorded by Plato. Now, given these difficulties in the way Nietzsche treats Socrates, to what extent is his critique applicable to Plato as well? So let's start with that question.
Okay. Well, I would say that with Plato's writings, to me a key thing is the Phaedrus. what is being said there about speaking versus writing. Right? And let me just say, in speaking, I cannot go back. There are disadvantages and advantages of both. In writing, I can begin at the end of a book, as I did with this wonderful dissertation just now on Nietzsche, entitled "Thou Shalt Not Believe Me," Nietzsche's Ethics of Reading and the Movement for Emancipation.
And the dissertation is by, I know you told me...
Nathalie Lachance. Okay. She's going to be there too, Monday. She's going to give a talk on that. Well, anyhow, Nathalie Lachance argues that, she begins with Plato's Phaedrus. And the idea of the Phaedrus on, let's say, the advantage of speaking is you can ask me what do you mean by something. The disadvantage is we can't go back to the beginning. In writing, any written text, you can read it from the beginning, from the end, you can go back and forth, but then it's open to misinterpretation. It says the same thing over and over and over again. Now, every generation of readers will have its own implicit second nature baggage. It will project, it will not see certain things in the written text. Now, the Platonic dialogue is designed to avoid, in the Phaedrus, there are all the reasons given why Plato didn't write treatises but wrote dialogues, in order to avoid precisely the kind of, how shall I say, the kind of misreadings that are possible on the basis of any written text. Now, of course, I believe that the whole history of Platonism is largely a history of misreading of Plato. Plato's opinion on this, Plato's theory of ideas, Plato's doctrine of the soul, whatever, right? Now, Plato says nothing in his own name. Everything is open in the Platonic dialogue, and it's a method of writing designed to force the reader to work hard, to understand, to examine contrary opinion, and in the process of doing that, the reader changes, is transformed. So it's an ascesis, an ethic of reading, which is imposed by the Platonic dialogue. Now, Nietzsche has a similar ethic of reading. Nietzsche too shuns, because he, the aphorism is not complete. He says dozens and dozens of things how he should or should not be read, and that the fact is that the aphorism has to be completed by the reader. And in the process of completing, as Jill Marston in her wonderful essay points out, I think she's one of the greatest scholars on Nietzsche today. She's at Bolton University in Northern, her essays in that book here, on Nietzsche's art of the aphorism is, she points out, so what the reader does, okay, so now I read this aphorism, then I have to go to the next one, and then the next one, and I have to ask myself, why does Nietzsche choose to write 35 after 34? What is the connection? I have to ask that question. In the process of in trying to understand what the aphorism says, I have to complete it in my mind. In the process of completing it, my subconscious and my unconscious mind is engaged in the reading of it, and I often am confronted with he says these outrageous things, Nietzsche does. Completely outrageous. How can he possibly say these things? Right?
That's to provoke the reader.
To provoke the reader, and to make the reader implicitly examine his or her prejudices, and in the process, you're changing the reader. Right? Yes. Now, of course, it doesn't work with a superficial reader. Most readers are thick-witted literalists. Right?
Or they are weak, so in the first shot they're gone.
They are weak readers, and they tend to take things literally, and they don't reason. So both Nietzsche's texts and Plato's texts are incitations to reasoning, not about Platonic doctrines, not about Nietzsche's doctrines, not about Plato's theory, Nietzsche's theory, but about the problems that are being discussed in the dialogue, or the problems that are being approached in a Nietzschean text, right? For example, Morgenröte is on the prejudices of morality, or morality as a prejudice, right? Now, that's a big topic, right? Now, say, for example, the Republic of Plato is a dialogue which raises the question, what is justice? It does so in the middle of a big war at the house of an arms manufacturer. Right? Right. Now, most interpreters simply ignore that. That they ignore the fact that, listen, there's an arms manufacturer, Cephalus, who fabricates instruments of death, and he has a view of justice. Can I believe his view of justice? He's killing. He's engaged in killing. Right. Immediately I have to face that question. Right? Or I have to face the question, what about war and justice? Can there be just wars?
Just war, or can we be just while fighting a war?
Yeah. Can you be just while fighting a war? Right? And then you have to go, and the same thing with the symposium. The symposium is also set in the middle of the war, and then, you know, so many of the Platonic dialogues begin recounting an oral conversation that was had years ago, right? I mean, for example, the symposium is an oral conversation which is recounted by somebody who heard it from somebody who was present, who himself was not present.
Yeah.
So you have the same kind of transmission from oral to speaking, from speaking to writing, that you have in the Christian texts. I mean, none of the gospel writers knew Jesus personally and they recorded. It was not a recording.
There's no recording, yes.
It wasn't a recording. They made up, they fictionalized.
But they could have written down what Christ said at the time.
Yeah, well, 35 years later. The first gospel is 36 years after the crucifixion, right? And one of them is 120 years afterwards. Please, you know, you have to be, you need a lot of faith, you know, you need as much faith as you need when you go to a used car salesman. So, you know, to not to be that you accept this as the word, right? But that's how it is bandied about, right? Yeah. And the word is then they use Platonic reasoning and Aristotelian reasoning to support the veracity of the doctrine, right? And so that the whole history of Western philosophy is a history of true doctrines, until Kant comes to, you know, try to, he transcendentalizes everything, right? And well, actually, you know, just points out, in Nietzsche's, for example, aphorism 19, I believe, of Beyond Good and Evil, he says, I do not tire to affirm to logicians that a thought comes when it wants to, not when I want to. And that the I is a fiction put on later. So I think, therefore I am, is destroyed. The whole Cartesian cogito is gone.
Gone, yeah.
And that you have the whole history of Western philosophy just like, you know, exploded there. Now, so, but you know, most readers wouldn't make the connection, right? Wouldn't make that when Nietzsche writes this, he doesn't have to say he's talking about Descartes, right? But it has to be read by somebody. My God, cogito ergo sum is impossible. It's a fiction. Now, it may be a necessary fiction, right? That a particular form of life, in the line of with Nietzsche's understanding of truth, the truth is an error without which a particular form of life could not live. The value for life is that which is decisive. Right? So that is now both Plato and Nietzsche force the reader into questioning. Now Plato has been dogmatized. Let's say, I mean, let's think about the whole theory of ideas. One of the first dialogues written by Plato that we know of, of the sequence when he wrote which dialogue, is the Phaedo. The Phaedo deals with the last day of Socrates. Socrates' death, right? So it shows old Socrates. The Parmenides, which is the main source for the so-called theory of ideas, shows a young Socrates, and it was written in Plato's old age. That's verifiable. Right. So old Plato and has young Socrates present a so-called theory of ideas, which is refuted in that very dialogue. So Socrates didn't know yet, he was young. Right? Right? In the Parmenides, most of the arguments brought forward by Aristotle against the so-called Plato's theory of ideas are already written by Plato in the dialogue Parmenides, where they are put in the mouth of an immature young Socrates. Now in the Phaedo, in an early dialogue with old Socrates, Socrates uses ideas. He says, I have the idea of such and such, right? As if there had been never a critique of ideas that he was subjected to when he was young. Now, I have to put these are edge dialogues. One at the beginning of Plato's writing career, the other one at the end of Plato's writing career. Right? And they present very different pictures of ideas. Right? So how do I then
put them together? And
well, I have to put them together because I have to, but then it makes me think, well, okay, maybe there's no such thing as a theory of ideas. Now then I have to go to other dialogues. I have to let's say I go to the famous discussion in the Laws where Plato talks about ignorance, different kinds of ignorance. And let's say, for example, Plato on the Nietzsche criticizes Plato for saying, okay, if somebody does a bad thing, it's because he is ignorant, right? That if he knew better, if he knew the good, he wouldn't do it. Right? And Nietzsche says, well, how naive that is, right? Because it is naive to say it that way. But I don't know if Plato does say it that way. That's the problem. It is naive because it leaves out to an account that somebody may be unable to do what he or she thinks is good. Like a guy who is a smoker may know that smoking is bad for him, may be unable to stop. So may not be able to do the good because of an emotional disfiguration. Right? So that raises the whole question of knowing the good, the emotional involvement. Now, I mean, Plato in the Laws has a whole discussion of emotions, how they shape ignorance, how they make people, believe certain things that are not the case. And then he distinguishes two kinds of ignorance. Ignorance, the Athenian stranger does. Ignorance where the person believes he is knowledgeable, and ignorance where the person is simply confused. Right? And the ignorance which is accompanied by the belief in knowledge is, of course, something... Well, the whole of society is governed by people who believe they know when in fact they don't know, who govern on the basis of wrong opinions. Right? I mean, think of the whole thing, the whole of American society is mammonist. Right? The belief that the possession of large amounts of money is a good thing. Right? So people strive for money. And if you don't strive for money, you are a fool. Either a fool or you have it already. They can't accept the fact that somebody might not. In my seminar on Zarathustra, I began by handing out a portrait of Mammon, which I found in London. I show it to you here.
Yeah. Can you
in
also
London.
Hold it? No,
sorry.
Let's see here first. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's good. Yeah. Let me have it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here. You can keep this.
Thank you.
George Frederick Watts, 1884-85. It's so powerful. It's in the Tate Britain. It's a portrait in the Tate Britain, but it's not in the permanent collection, so I had to ask for a... It shows this guy Mammon. You can't see it very well. The face is
That's actually, if you can hold it.
This is the original that I got from the Tate Britain.
To this way, yeah, okay.
I got it from the Tate Britain.
You can bring it closer a little bit, so lower.
And what is okay? So
good.
Here Mammon,
thank you. That's good. Yeah,
having bags of money, and he has his feet on two youths who are naked there, whom he oppresses. Well, perfect image for our society, right? And Mammon is there proud, but when you look at the face closely, he cries. He has tears in his eyes. He's not happy, but he's proud. He does not want to give up. To me, a perfect image of Mammonism. Right?
Yeah. But can we come back to your earlier comments on Plato and the good? Do you think Nietzsche usually is a good reader of text, but when he makes these comments on Plato about the good and how naive it is for Plato to say that we do the good, we do the wrong thing because we are ignorant of the good. Do you think Nietzsche is making some kind of a general statement on
He's
Plato?
He's making a general statement about Platonism, as it has been interpreted, the so-called theory of the good.
Good, yeah.
Like, for example, Voegelin points out that nothing is said whatever about what the good is. Right? That means people believe many things to be the good. Mammonists believe money is good.
Good, yeah.
Others believe health is good. Yet others believe eternal salvation is good. Right?
But why is Nietzsche making this kind of blanket statement about Plato, although
because of the Christian Platonism? Because it's established in the way I see it. Christianity is a system of teachings. It's first a way of life, and then becomes a system of doctrines supported by force and fraud, right? Which is transmitted, and one of the supports is Platonic reasoning. Now, the highest good, there is such a thing as the highest good. That's what the Christian Platonists want us to believe. Right?
But do you think that is also in Plato or not?
No, it's not. There is the good in itself, that it's a phrase in the context, let's say in the Republic, in the context where it's being said in such a way as to say, if we ask the question, is this course of action a good one to pursue for me? Right? Should I really engage here, or is this, let's say, should I marry this woman or not marry this woman? As an example. is it good for me to marry this woman?
No.
All right, well, we have. All right, this is Francine. Hello, Francine.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Sorry to interrupt with my déraison.
No, and this is, I could also introduce our guest, Jose. Can you tell us who you are, Jose?
Thank you. I'm a former student of Professor Hodder's, and I'm very delighted to be here.
Okay, great to have you as a guest. Jose now lives in Colombia, right?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
I'm a professor.
Perfect, professor in Bogota. Bogota University?
Externado de Colombia, it's called the university.
Okay, excellent.
Externado de Colombia.
Okay. All right, let's come back to Professor
the good in
yes.
itself. Supposing I now say, I reason through, do I do X or don't I do X? I say, okay, if I lose money, let's say, if I do this, I have to live in a certain place, which has advantages and disadvantages, right? So in all of these things, I have to then ask myself, is this, whatever it is, is this good in itself for me, right? That particular course of action, apart from its utility, apart from its beauty, apart from its whatever it may be, the advantages it may bring me, and so on. And it cannot be defined for globally for everything, right? You cannot define the good, because Plato doesn't have a transcendent good. The idea of the good that can be defined arises with Abrahamite religions, because there is a good which is beyond, right? And this is, I think, what Nietzsche attacks. And Nietzsche attacks the logical foundations of it, which are derived from Platonic and Aristotelian reasoning. And this would also mean that I do not think that, for example, Aristotle is that different from Plato. We know, I mean, I took this course with Ado, and one of the seminar was on a lost dialogue of Aristotle, which was found in Afghanistan in a dig in Ai-Khanum. And we were working on it in a seminar, trying to translate it, and it was carried there by a student of Aristotle who accompanied Alexander to Afghanistan, a fellow called Dikearchos. Now Dikearchos brought this dialogue, apparently other things along, and it's verifiable Platonic writing. Now we know Aristotle wrote dialogues, which in antiquity had the reputation of being very high, on very high stylistic level. Cicero knew them, read them. And there's even the rumor that Cicero's dialogues are simply copies of Aristotle's dialogues, right? Cicero was, I mean, you didn't have copyright restrictions at the time, right?
But all the copying it, was a norm.
Now, so Aristotle wrote dialogues for public writing. What we have is for school. And Ado would go through, we're discussing the ethics. No, I'm sorry, the politics. And so we would go through, and he would point out, okay, now all of a sudden, this looks like an answer to a question. So there was an audience that listened to it, and then Aristotle answered that question. So there's not a coherent reasoning in Aristotle's writings, but it discusses certain questions of second philosophy. There's first philosophy, second and third philosophy. Right? First philosophy is the principles of reasoning, metaphysics, and so on, because Aristotle didn't use the term metaphysics. The term was invented in the 4th century of our era. So you have all of these Christian accretions. Now, one of the things that always strikes me, last year I had a Muslim student who was very upset by the fact when I said, you know, I have real problem with accepting the Quran as the literal word of God in classical Arabic. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Okay, fine. I accept, okay, God said this. But the problem I have is that Muhammad was an analphabet. He didn't know how to read and write. He spoke, he was a poetic genius, probably, great, great speaker. And there were 4 versions of the Quran when he died.
Written by different people.
Written by different people. And Caliph Uthman, the 3rd of the Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs, destroyed 3 versions and kept 1. Now, why did he do that? Obviously for political reasons, right? So that text was established, the Quran is a text established for political reasons. At a certain time after Muhammad's death. So, first of all, I can't assume it's Muhammad's word. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Well, it could be modified as it was being written down.
Already, every writing is
already
a modification of speaking. Irreversible modification.
Yeah, Horst, we are running out of time here. Just maybe 2 more minutes.
Yeah. So I said this to this student, and he got very upset. A Muslim, right? And he said, prophets are superior to philosophers. They know how to walk on water. So I asked him, did Muhammad walk on water? He said no.
But he did other things.
But Jesus apparently walked on water. But then I said to him, look, according to Christian teaching, Jesus is much more than a prophet. Jesus is the Son of God.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, but this is, then you run up against that sort of thing, right? Prophets know how to walk on water. Okay. So Jesus is superior to any other philosopher because he walked on water. Plato, I never heard Plato walking on water. Or Socrates, any one of those walking on water. I know Aristophanes portrays Socrates with his ass sticking up in the air, right?
But Socrates had other qualities.
Had other qualities.
Yes, he could stand hunger and he could endure pain and things like that. Yeah.
He walked barefoot in snow.
Yeah. he drank but he didn't get drunk, right?
Yeah. Now the point is, I think what Nietzsche does, he understands that. He understands first of all the transition from orality to writing. Right? How important that is. Hence the numerous references in Nietzsche of reading with the ears, for which one does not have ears. When one reads it, one does not understand. He says all the time.
Do you think he's trying to revive the oral tradition in that way?
Yes, I think so. And he can't, for example, he puts aphorisms there which question absolutely everything that has been said before. Aphorism 296 of Beyond Good and Evil. If I have it, I forget I have it. Right?
Yes, we have 2 minutes.
Yeah, aphorism 296 of Beyond Good and Evil. Alas, what are you after all, my written and painted thoughts? Written and painted thoughts. Okay, so there were the thoughts first. Right? Fine. It was not long ago that you were still so colorful, young, and malicious. The thoughts. Full of thorns and secret spices. You made me sneeze and laugh. And now you have already taken off your novelty, and some of you are really, I fear, to become truths. Already I fear to become truths. Right? My okay, why did I? They already look so immortal, so particularly decent, so dull. And has it ever been different? Has it ever been different, right? Whatever things do we copy, writing and painting, we mandarins with Chinese brushes. We immortalizers of things that can be written. That means there are thoughts that cannot be written.
Yeah. So
that not because they are immoral or something, because you can't do it.
Yeah.
With what are the only things we are able to paint? Alas, always only what is on the verge of withering and losing its fragrance.
Okay.
Alas, always only storms that are passing, exhausted and feeling that are autumnal and yellow.
Okay, all right, Horst,
yeah. Now, this is the last aphorism of Beyond Good and Evil.
All right, okay, let's go.
What things do we mandarins with Chinese brushes, we immortalizers of things that can be written. What are the only things we are able to paint? Alas, always only what is on the verge of withering and losing its fragrance. Alas, always only storms that are passing, exhausted and feelings that are autumnal and yellow. Alas, always only birds that grew weary of flying and flew astray and now can be caught by hand, by our hand. We immortalize what cannot live and fly much longer. Very significant, I think. The thoughts are living and flying. And he wants to introduce living and flying thoughts in the reader's mind. Only weary and mellow things. And it is only your afternoon, you, my written and painted thoughts, for which alone I have colors. Many colors perhaps, many motley caresses and 50 yellows and browns and greens and reds. But nobody will guess from that how you looked in your morning, you sudden sparks and wonders of my solitude, you my old beloved wicked thoughts. So I mean that is, now I would analyze this in terms of Platonic phaedrus. So he said from the perspective of him, he discusses how he had these thoughts. And first of all, there was much more than what he wrote. They looked very different. They were very wicked. They were sparks of inspiration. There was a whole series of noesis. Now, if we know about how Nietzsche wrote his books, he would go on these long walks, he would have pieces of paper in his pocket, and he would write down what came to him, the thoughts, the sparks, the sudden sparks. And he would go home, put them down in notebooks, and then make a selection and changing them on the basis of the impact they have on the reader. The selection is about 1 in 4. The published writings are about 1/4 of what he has written, right? In terms of page numbers, right? And much of what was not selected. And one of the principal selection was the rhetorical impact on the reader. And he often, he would have Peter Gast read them aloud to him, right, and others. And he would read them aloud, and what was important was the speaking, the oral thing. So here is the thought, the flashed insight. Then there is the spoken thought, and then there's the writing. Now in reading, I have to reverse that whole direction. I look at this, and I think, okay, now, but I have to read it in sequence. So if, of course, I skip that paragraph, which is at the very end of the book, I lose an important insight relevant for the entire book. I simply do not understand what he said in that book. If the book is entitled, okay, I go back to the beginning. The book is entitled Beyond Good and Evil, Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. And he has a lot of things to say about what a philosopher is, you know, and this contains all those right sayings where he says Plato is the philosopher with the greatest strength ever of anyone, a royal hermit of the spirit, someone who, when on his deathbed, he read Aristophanes, nothing Egyptian, right? So he read comedy. And this is what, so okay, so now in reading I have to then translate this first into the oral thought, and he says it exhorts his readers frequently to read aloud, which of course means that there is no such thing as a translation, right? It has to be read in German. Because only if you get to the orality of the German will you be able to get to the insight, right, that is behind. Now, many readers will not have that insight. They will not make the connection, let's say, between aphorisms. They will skip certain things. They will not fully understand. And for example, Kaufmann's translation is very bad. Even though Kaufmann used to pride himself on accuracy of translation, criticizing liberally others for so-called inaccurate translation, he introduces into Nietzsche's aphorisms paragraphs. Now, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil is written without paragraphs.
Each aphorism is just one whole paragraph.
That means that the reader introduces the breaks, not Kaufmann, the translator. Right? Now, if I read and then all of a sudden I stop and I get tired, or I get flustered, I say, I don't understand this. So I then put the break where my thought pattern puts it, not where Kaufmann decides I should put it.
And also the punctuation.
And the punctuation.
Also, Nietzsche's punctuation is somewhat unique.
So all of these things are a method of writing which evokes my unconscious, my identifications, which in my case is Christian. I can't get away from that. I was raised a Catholic, and I was sort of driven out of the church by a priest.
Really driven out
well,
physically?
I tell you one thing. I was 13, and we were taken as a class to confession. It was it was in May, a merry holiday, a confession, and I was sick on Thursday when the priest, as fanatic, had taken us to confession. I went on my own to confession on Saturday. I confessed totally. I was totally pure, totally turned towards God. I mean, I was so open, right? I really had faith, everything. When it came on Sunday, when I was kneeling in front of the altar, before the priest came to put the Holy Host on my lip, the full view of the church, filled with lots of people, hundreds of people in the church, the priest who saw me kneeling there had not seen me at confession. Before the priest with the host came to me, he tore me away from the altar in full view of the church. Wow. I was shattered. I was absolutely, it's God rejecting me, right? Because I was so pure, so turned towards God in that confession.
You felt shame in the eyes of all?
Absolutely. I burst out crying, right? I felt ashamed for crying. But from that moment on, I began to leave the church. And as soon as I could do it legally, I signed myself out, which was at age 18.
Oh, yeah. You did the paperwork.
Yeah. Now, this is my experience of Catholicism. And then I had a period where, I was shouting to myself and to everybody who wanted to hear, écraser l'infâme. You know?
Yeah.
Do away with that. Now, I have modified on the basis of reading Nietzsche. I understand its political usefulness, provided they don't get out of hand. Provided they are governed by philosophers.
Did you ever confront this priest later on, the priest who...
No. But the neighbor who saw it happening confronted him. Right? And engaged him in conversation there. Said, look, what is this? You know?
Yeah.
But no, that priest, oh God, he was awful. He gave religious instructions in describing the tortures of Christ in glowing detail and with absolute joy about the tortures of Christ. Right? I had such nightmares from this. I was so upset about his description of all the things, the horrible things they did to Jesus, right? Which is what Foucault calls a carnival of atrocity, right? Yeah. That's exactly what it is, right? And so I was shattered, but he had what in German is called Wonne. It was like just an enjoyment for him to describe. And so then, I read, for example, I have a copy of Bataille's Erotisme, and it has a picture of Saint Teresa of Avila contemplating a particularly horrible portrayal of the crucifixion. That is, contemplating the wounds of Christ. And the expression on her face is an orgasm. Yeah. She's having an orgasm.
Yes, that's Bataille's reading of the mystic sort of orgasmic states. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, the picture is well chosen. It's a painting, right? In my office now, I have I began my course with the portrait of Mammon. I hand it out to everyone. Everybody has Mammon. And then I have a particularly gory picture of the torture of Christ. You can see it in my office. It's by Quentin Massis, 1515. It hangs in the Prado in Madrid. Wonderful portrait, absolutely superb. I mean, the face of Jesus is so filled with suffering, right? And all the others, hypocrites, and looking there, and I mean, just awful. Exactly the human condition, right? Now, you see, I think that it is St. Paul who put this as the central image, one of the central images, because Christianity also has another central image, the mother and the child, right? Which is a beautiful image. Right? But Saint Paul is responsible for that. Right? This is the Eucharist. Right? The celebration of the Mass is the celebration of the torture and resurrection of Christ.
Yeah. Well, this may sound blasphemous, but do we really know whether Christ felt the pain or not? Because there is a claim that maybe he didn't feel the pain.
Anybody who says that, I would say, okay, why don't you let yourself be tortured and see if you scream.
But there is a medical condition where some people, it's very rare, where some people don't feel the physical pain.
Well,
it's like one in maybe million.
Yeah, there is a story that Christ was a member, Jesus was a member of a particular fraternity of the Order of the Essenes, which was a healing order. that Christ did not die on the cross, was taken down, and the Essenes healed him, and then he migrated to India and lived out his life there. Because there is a place, well, you told me about, a place in India where people have a living tradition of that transition of Jesus from Palestine to India. To this day.
So he died. He died there.
He died. He lived as a teacher in India and died then of old age.
Old age.
Yeah. Now that makes sense to me. But think of the whole, everything that has been constructed around this. And when Nietzsche looks at this, it's madness. Right? It's just madness. Sheer madness. Right? Now, what is the root of that madness? Right? Why would human beings be so bloody mad that they would focus on something like this and be so completely, and then repeat it to other human beings all through history? I mean, the history of Christianity is a history of violence, torture, and murder. Right? I mean, Islam too, of course.
Yeah.
And Judaism to a certain extent too. The only thing about the Jews is they have been only now in a position where they can beat up on others, right? Before that, they have always been in a position of being the victims. Right?
Well, but why don't we come back to? Are you done with the Phaedrus part?
The Phaedrus, so there is 3 levels. There is reading, translation into inner oral logos, dianoia. Both of them are acts of dianoia. Then thinking it through, the inner thought process, and then the insight, which may or may not come. The noesis. So the other things are levels of dianoia, discursive understanding, discursive reasoning, and let's say all religious doctrine is on the level of dianoia. Let's say yesterday when I was at the dissertation, there was one guy who had accused Nietzsche of trying to abolish the moral code, and we need the moral code, we need the 5th commandment, and so on. Yeah, well,
Nietzsche's thought is extra moral, he's not to abolish the moral code. But his main thing is that our moral code is an interpretation. So there are different kinds of moral codes.
That's right.
We'll always have a moral code.
Well, and the thing is that Nietzsche wrote and understood what was happening at a time when European Christianity was becoming global, when the world was becoming one, right? And he understood that the crisis that the whole of the planet and humanity on the planet is facing. He prognosticated this, he foretold it, he foresaw it. There will be wars like there have never been wars before. Right? But that doesn't mean he caused those wars.
No. He's.
But this guy was saying, yes, he's responsible for it.
That would give too much credit to Nietzsche.
Yeah, I know. Much too much credit. Yeah. Well, Voegelin, in his essay on Nietzsche, The Crisis and the War, the first paragraph says Nietzsche is the only philosophy who has ever been credited with starting a world war.
But this question I had before, that Nietzsche knows Plato, read Plato's dialogues, but on the other hand, he goes along with this reading of Plato as the one who originated the theory of ideas. So why do you think Nietzsche still keeps sticking to this reading of Plato, although he's a good reader? He read Plato's dialogues.
Because he's a Christian. Because that's the Christian Platonism.
So it's still...
He's attacking Christianity. And as he says at the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil,
the preface.
Christianity is Platonism for the
people.
Yes,
right?
And so his attack is on Christianity, on himself.
On himself.
On his own Christian second nature.
Yeah, but why is he putting Plato with Christianity all the time? I mean,
because the Christians did.
Yeah.
And the whole literature does. Augustine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the, yeah.
Augustine does.
Yeah.
And I mean, Saint Paul, of course, not. But Saint Paul was in Tarsus, a city which was, in terms of philosophical schools, very much influenced by the Stoics.
Yes, Stoicism. And there's Antipater of Tarsus, yeah.
A Stoicism, and it was the home of the Attis cult, a cult based on human sacrifice.
Ah, yeah, is it a Roman god?
No, Attis is not a Roman god, is a Middle Eastern god, and who is a devotee of Cybele, the mother goddess, and who there are certain festivals, and I forget in spring exactly when it happened, when young men would, flagellate themselves in honor of the mother goddess, and some went even as far as castrating themselves. Right? Now I know that there, for example, in the Abruzzi, there are Christians who at Easter
they
go around flagellate. And there was in the Philippines recently, I just read, there was guys who let themselves be crucified, literally, with nails.
Crucified. And did they survive?
They survived, yeah. But they have guys drive nails in them, and they hang out there on the cross for a while to show the fact that they are good Christians.
Tarsus is half an hour to my hometown, so I'm from that region. Although I do not subscribe to Stoicism nor to Saint Paul's teachings. But do we know if there's any connection between Saint Paul and Stoicism? Did he know?
Well,
Stoic
there
teachings?
is I read a book called Saint Paul the Epicurean that made a lot of sense.
Not a Stoic, but an Epicurean.
Epicurean. And that Saint Paul, the fact of the emphasis on the community, on the group, and all of that is very Epicurean. Right? The common meals, the celebration of the community, and so on, is really modeled on the Epicurean communities, which were very successful in antiquity. And it also draws with it, for example, the whole concept of the sarx in Saint Paul, the flesh. That's an Epicurean term. It's Epicurus who introduced that term into philosophy, in terms of saying that, arguing, like, say, for example, my stomach is a very bad philosopher. Right? And the flesh, the saying, the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak, is really a derivation of Epicurus. It's derived from Epicurus. That is, the flesh doesn't know by itself when it has enough. Right? So you need the mind in order to tell the flesh that, okay, now you've eaten enough, right? Or you've done enough of X, something that the flesh likes. Right?
So the flesh is a certain interpretation of the body.
That's right.
It's really like the Leib in German to Körper. Körper is more the physical, the body.
Exactly.
The
Leib.
The reading of the
I have
body.
wonderful passage about Leitfaden des Leibes, on the guiding thread of the body. An aphorism in unpublished aphorism where Nietzsche, the aphorism entitled is Physiology versus Morality. And it's in the form of a dialogue with Ariadne, where whoever is having that dialogue with Ariadne is telling Ariadne that she is 2,000 years out of whack, that she is behind the times. She still reasons in terms of physiology, of morality. But in fact, everything has to be translated into physiological terms, And then he goes into a detailed description of what goes on when we do a thing called thinking, right? And a completely developed theory of the unconscious, the subconscious, how conscious thoughts arise. And then at the end he tells Ariadne, you know, what we live in, life is a labyrinth. And we have to find our thread out of the labyrinth. You did it once for Theseus, right? Yeah. Theseus abandoned you and so on.
On Naxos.
Jerk. Right.
On Naxos.
On Naxos. Now, we have to, first of all, we have to find you a husband. To Ariadne.
Dionysus appears.
Dionysus, exactly. And then we have to use the light as the guiding thread to find our way through the labyrinth of life. Right? And the life is a labyrinth, and we need a thread to find our way through this labyrinth, and in order to avoid the Minotaur.
Mm-hmm. The monster.
The monster. Mm-hmm. And the guiding thread now is, on the basis of physiology, is the life. And the study of the life, what makes the life sick, what makes the life healthy, what makes it strong, what makes it weak, what nutrition, all of these things become very important then, because if we and so what he proposes, the whole culture has to follow the guiding thread of the life. Yeah. Right? That means that what he calls for in that same aphorism is an order of physicians, healers, philosophers and priests. That is, human beings that are physicians, healers, philosophers and priests in one. Mm-hmm. That a new type of healing, a new type of physician who is a priest and a philosopher.
And that they formulate new regimes of the body and the soul.
New regimes of the body and of the soul.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, for example, this is the whole thing, the way I read Will to Power, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, in the aphorism in Zarathustra, called On Self-Overcoming, it begins with a dialogue where Zarathustra addresses the wisest. Right? Mm-hmm. You are motivated by the will to truth. This is what makes you, agitates you the wisest. I call this will to power. Right? And it goes on to describe this. And what is a will to power is the unexhausted procreative life will. Right? However, the unexhausted procreative life will constructs a labyrinth for us in which we have to live, right? And in order to find our way through this labyrinth, then we need a teaching for the few and a teaching for the many. And the teaching for the few is that there is no such thing as will, that will is something that has to be striven for and created in a human being's life, and one has to teach them how to do it. Right? And then there is a teaching for the many, and that is will to power. Mm-hmm. And will to power is a mythology which looks back to antiquity. It unveils Abrahamite religious teaching and the whole of the tradition of Western metaphysics as a hidden will to power. So Heidegger is right in this. Heidegger sees the whole tradition of Western metaphysics as a will to power. The ultimate outcome of that is the internet. Technology. But including cybernetics at the top. That's what Heidegger said. And I said, well, you know, I've heard people say that the internet is the mind of God. Well, if that's true, God has a very dirty mind.
Pornographic. but Heidegger also says we have to confront technology within technology. So we have to understand the essence of technology within technology.
But I think for Nietzsche, and Heidegger follows him in this, the fundamental problem is the problem of revenge. The desire to escape from life is motivated by revenge against life. Now, why would revenge arise? Okay, so I think there are three things in the natural condition of humanity that would cause lots of revenge. And once vengeance is established, it regenerates itself in cycles of revenge. Right? Yeah. 2 minutes?
I propose that we move on to the subject of revenge in the next round.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, let's, because there's not much time left on this. I don't think we'll be able to. Yeah, it's a big topic, so I'm going to turn it off now.
Yeah.
And let's stop. Okay.
Yes.
Hi again, everybody.
Yeah. Hi.
Now, the other question we have for Professor Hutter is here. It's on Socrates and Plato. Now, Plato is portrayed in the early writings as a typical Hellenic youth, with a quotation, who has fallen a victim to Socrates. This is in the early works, the first volume of the Kritische Stundenausgabe. Even his underestimation of art is attributed to the influence of Socrates. Plato is in struggle against himself from the the first volume. Why do you think Nietzsche is withholding his harsh criticism of Plato from the public in this phase of his life? So how do you see this whole thing?
The early Nietzsche.
The early Nietzsche.
Well, I think he evolved to. I think his real enemy, his target, is Christianity, and he has a certain understanding of the history of Christianity, which sees the important influence of Greek logos on the development of Christian teaching and Christian doctrine and so on. But his attack, I mean, see, for example, I find it hard to, does Plato really have or Socrates really a critique, a teaching of the fall? They talk about ignorance. Ignorance, the Greek word for sin, which becomes in the New Testament sin, hamartia, is a word derived from the domain of archery. Hamartanein means to miss the mark. When an archer misses the mark, all kinds of reasons could be adduced for missing the mark. He's drunk that day, he's a bad archer, he had to practice more, and so on. But certainly it's not an inborn sin. Not something, a stain that is acquired with birth, right? Or which is even transmitted, unless somebody wants to argue being a bad archer is transmitted from father to son. And so I think his target, Nietzsche's target in general, is Christianity. And he wants to undo what he calls the metaphysics of the hangman, which is the notion that there is a God who is the judge, to whom, and in the invention of eternal punishment, the quote of Tertullian that he uses, and of St. Thomas Aquinas, that one of the pleasures of the saved will be to watch the tortures of the damned. I mean, it's just sheer madness in Nietzsche's. Nietzsche says, well, why would they become so mad to imagine something like this? What is it about life that makes them, and I think there are three things about life that Nietzsche could adduce, or that people come up against, and which lots of people don't like and cause cycles for revenge. One is the fact of natural inequality. Human beings are not equal. It's simply wrong to, and Plato doesn't think they are. Definitely not.
Right?
There are people, you know, and you know, the division of human beings into the three classes that we find in the Republic, you also find in St. Paul, and you find it, I think, in Nietzsche. There are the ones, the few, and then there are the ones who are highly themotic, highly spiritual, and then there are the many. And there's nothing wrong with being in any one of these. Now, inequality, however, is not, rank order, Nietzsche uses rank order, is not the same as class division. Not at all.
You mean economic class division?
Political economic class, the ones that are established in modern societies. As a matter of fact, I think the good political order, the good arrangement of the body politic would be modeled on a healthy body. In a healthy body, when he analyzes the will in aphorism 19, he points out that what is called the body is a series of underwills and undersouls, and in that aphorism that I analyzed down in Santiago from the dialogue with Ariadne, there's a wonderful passage about how the human life is organized in the most perfect fashion. There is choosing and intelligent resistance in it. At some point, you know, the liver is a subordinate organ. Everybody would admit that. It's not the most important, right? But at some point the liver revolts. It says, no more of this, right? And I think one of the most important texts behind Nietzsche's understanding of political order is that book by Wilhelm Roux, Der Organismus als innerer Kampf, the organism as inner struggle. The philosophical anatomist from Berlin University, who, and this is an important idea for Nietzsche, so that's the model for good political order. That is, there is rule in the body, there's a nervous system that controls things, and that within the nervous system there are aspects of it that control other aspects, but everything is functioning in such a way that the subordinate organs and the subordinate classes have their function, and they have their say, and see, I think this is what he would like to see in the body politic also. But of course, we are very far from that, and extremely far from that. And so rank order is not the same as class structure. I think the second aspect that Nietzsche focuses on, that is the fact of mortality. Now, mortality is a general problem. Right? The fact that no one can die my death for me, that I have to do it myself, because if someone else could die for someone else, the rich would pay lots of people to die for them, but they can't. Right? So, you know, so it's immortality. So, okay, so rank order, mortality. Now, rank order and mortality would, somebody might live longer, like lead a healthier life. So those who are sickly resent. I'm very impressed by Nietzsche's analysis of ressentiment. The fact that if someone is fat and ugly, that he might resent someone who is handsome, thin and beautiful, is perfectly understandable. Right?
You can apply it to so many different things in terms of resentment.
Yeah. And it's perfectly understandable. And once resentment is acted on, you see, resentment is that attitude to propensity to act, where the person who resents, even if it were in his or her interest not to do what he is doing, He does it anyhow in order to get the other one down. Right? I mean, I noticed this when I was chairman. I would propose something which I thought would be in everybody's interest, and people would oppose me. I couldn't understand it. And then they figured out they oppose me because I propose it. And even if it's in their interest, I get it. If I get through with that proposal, then I have the glory, and they don't want that.
Yeah. So it's out of resentment.
Out of resentment, out of envy, and especially unknown envy in the analysis of Zarathustra. Is so mortality, rancor, and the third thing I think very important in Nietzsche is the gender difference. And the fact that we are split up into men and women, and that women have native power over men. They can refuse men sexually. Of course, a man can rape, but rape is not the same thing as when a woman consents. I mean, there are no two ways about it, right?
But men also can refuse women.
Of course, yeah, but it's much less likely. It's much less likely. I mean, everything about my experience convinces me it's the male dogs who are running after the female dogs, right? And they have no choice. They must run after them. They're by an inner urging. Right? And the woman can just... So that causes resentment in men. Loss of male hostility towards men. Then Nietzsche attacks women, but I think he attacks Christian women. I mean, you know, I'm very impressed by the fact that when he writes in Ecce Homo, the second edition, which was left out in the original, that is the possibility that his mother and his sister might come back eternally made him doubt eternal recurrence. It's a consummate machinery from hell, he calls them. And you know that the whole idea of the Christian woman who is, you know, it's just, I think, so when he's arguing against, he sees emancipation coming out of that background, and what he holds against the emancipatory struggle is the fact that they want to make women over into men, right? They want to, and he doesn't, I don't think he wants that. I think he's opposed, he's for, let's say one thinks, for example, the woman Meta von Salis Marschlins, very important woman, friend of Nietzsche, very important. She was a rich heiress of a Swiss, very rich Swiss man who had a son and her. And she wanted to study, and her father absolutely forbade her. And at that time, there was only one university beside Oberlin College where women could study, and that was Zurich. And so what she did, she became a household girl, she became a servant girl in England for aristocratic women, made money, saved her money, and then went to encounter, I forget how she encountered Nietzsche, either through one of his books or she encountered him personally, and then she wanted to go study with him. And it was Nietzsche who seconded the motion at Basel University proposed by Jakob Burckhardt to accept women on an equal footing. Now that's not a misogynist who does that.
Yeah, yeah.
And Meta von Salis Marschlin then studied at the university, and she was the one who gave the money for setting up the Nietzsche archive in Weimar.
Much later, that's...
Much later, of course.
Yeah.
But she stayed loyal to Nietzsche and to his memory all her life, right? Was a great friend of Nietzsche. And there were other women like Helen Zimmern, Louise Ott, Malvida von Meisenburg.
There's also Lou Salome.
Lou Salome, this is a bit more ambiguous. Right?
Well, he was attracted to...
Oh, he was very attracted to her. And there was this mount, forget where they went up.
It's in some place in Nietzsche's, near Nietzsche's hometown.
Yeah, in northern Italy. No, in northern Italy.
Northern Italy?
They took a walk together on the mountain, and she never said what happened there. But maybe she kissed him, right? And I don't think he had much experience with being kissed.
Probably not. Yeah.
No, I don't think he was exactly a Casanova.
Yeah.
No, he was a very unfortunate. He was. I mean, he was, by his Christian background, I think he understood this too. He was an erotic cripple.
Mm-hmm. But also the times. This is the 19th century.
Oh God! Yes.
Probably the erotic or sexual relations were limited, perhaps among the rich and the free spirits, artists, and although Nietzsche wanted to be a free spirit, but
but you know, it required money to be a free spirit. If you wanted women on top of it,
money and fame. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, like I mean, just the story of Mathilde von Trampetach. Mm-hmm. She was a Baltic lady like Lou Salome, and she had come, I think she had read Human All Too Human and liked it very much, and she was coming with her mother to make the tour of Europe. So, and she came to Geneva, and Nietzsche was staying with Hugo von Sanger, his friend, who was the conductor of the Geneva Symphony Orchestra. And when Mathilde arrived there, she met Nietzsche there and said, "Oh, I know your book," and they started talking. She was so enthusiastic about it. And he was so smitten by that. And on the basis of a 2-hour conversation, he decided to propose to her.
That is an express proposal.
But what does he do? He doesn't go talk to her himself. He asks his friend Hugo von Sanger to propose to her on his behalf, which she ended up marrying him. I mean,
so never trust your friend.
I mean, think of that poor man, all alone, right? Probably longing for a woman, longing to have sexual experience, and at the same time being absolutely terrified of it, having been raised in this household which was controlled by 5 women.
Yeah.
All of them Christian women, right?
Yeah.
With extremely repressed sexualities.
Yes. Although they were Lutherans still. Yeah.
Yeah.
Repressed, the morality didn't change much.
Well, so that's what he is attacking. Once God is dead, what remains is the dragon with 1,000 scales. Mm-hmm. The Christian morality, which is embodied in human beings, in women, and in men. Yeah,
and it can even stay without Christianity or God. In I see that in 18th century atheism, 19th century even, the morality could still stay there without the God on the surface.
Yeah, I know. And so I think this is so these are certain facts of life that are ineluctable. That's part of the inexhausted procreative life will. That there are differences, that some are tall, some are short, some are smart, some are dumb, right? Some are fat, some are thin, and so on. Some are strong, some are weak. And everybody is mortal. Mm-hmm. So ultimately no one wins, really. No one. So
we can win in life, but maybe
you can
not.
Win in life, but that would motivate agnostic world rejection. You see, Christianity is so heavily influenced by Manichaeism, by money, and by other gnostic understandings, of the world. For example, Carl Schmitt, I think, is a Marcionite. He's very much influenced by Marcion. Marcion, 2nd century heretic, Marcionite heresy. Mm-hmm. He had a duotheistic conception of the divinity. There was the good God that was the father of Jesus, and then there was the true God that was the God of Abraham, who was a wicked God, right? And he was evil, right? So
the old God is the evil God,
and the new God, the God of the Tanakh is mostly the evil God. And the good God is the God of the New Testament, of Jesus. And I read this book, Le Marcionisme de Carl Schmitt. And you see, so here is, and Carl Schmitt was anti-Judaic, not anti-Semitic. And anti-Judaic is, I think, a very important distinction between anti-Semitic and anti-Judaic. I mean, after all, Schmitt, for example, helped Leo Strauss get a scholarship. So he wasn't anti-Semitic in a personal level. Right. But he was anti-Judaic. And so I think that duotheistic conception is also in Nietzsche. Nietzsche understands that period of history, the first 2 centuries, the Hellenistic and Roman period, late antiquity. That's where his spiritual home is. I mean, after all, he worked on Diogenes Laertius as a philologist.
But he doesn't probably see as much a big separation between Judaism and Christianity as, let's say, Schmitt does. Nietzsche sees more of a continuity.
There's more of a continuity
between Judaism and Christianity.
The book that I reviewed by Zev Golan, God, Man, and Nietzsche, which is an interesting book by a religious Zionist, you know, one of those who believes in the state of Israel, but is also a religious Jew. He liked my review, by the way. He wrote me an email saying he really thanked me, saying that I had understood him very well. And one of the things he has in there, he has gone through every mention of Nietzsche of the Jews. And he tries to find out how many are there hostile mentions, how many are there friendly mentions of the Jews, and how many are simply neutral.
Right? Or mixed, yeah.
And he calculated there are many hostile mentions of Jews, but each one of them is because Nietzsche is hostile against the Christians and traces something in Christianity to something in Judaism. So it's like he's not against the Jews. As a matter of fact, he has lots of respect. There's aphorism 205 from Volke Israel in Dawn of Day. It's a wonderful aphorism. It's so laudatory of the Jewish people. And then there's, of course, in the 1001 Rules in Zarathustra, which is also very laudatory of the Jewish people as a great people.
Yeah.
As a people who became great because they had a conception of values, a moral code that made them great. Right? So this is. So I think he has that understanding. I think Christianity is, however, a decline for him.
Yeah.
It's you know, to put it in like terms of Harold Bloom, you know, one wonders how Yahweh could have fathered his son by the name of Jesus. They're so different from one another.
Yeah.
You know, Yahweh is constantly angry, who's constantly... Well, of course, Nietzsche wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. He's virile, he's masculine. I think this is what he likes about the Muslims. They are a masculine religion, right?
Yeah. We are not sure how correct he is in his
No, of course. But you see, he has all these judgments which are very much influenced by his emotions, by his emotional understanding, by his ill health, and by what he understood in the 19th century of what was available. Knowledge about Buddhism, knowledge about Hinduism, knowledge about ancient, but he knew the ancients, right? He knew the Greeks.
And the recent studies of the life of Christ, more from scholarly historical perspectives, like Renan and Strauss,
he knew.
Strauss, those,
he knew that,
But if we may come back to my initial question about Socrates and Plato, and based on all the things that you said about resentment, ressentiment, and the whole thing about rank and file, and then your third point was on the gender relations. What can we say about this? That Socrates somehow influenced the noble Plato. I mean, what do you say about that? On
influenced? Well, obviously, I mean, Socrates. Plato had enormous respect for Socrates. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, Socrates was quite an extraordinary individual.
Would you say, would you agree with Nietzsche when he says Socrates was a man of ressentiment because he came from a humble family and he resented the nobility?
No, I don't think so.
But you know
I think that's a
Nietzsche's
caricature.
Okay, all right.
I think that's a politically motivated caricature. Mm-hmm. He wants to, well, he is attacking the image of Socrates in the culture, in his culture.
But not
and
Socrates
so
himself.
No, I don't think the historical Socrates. Who knows what the historical Socrates? I mean, there are all kinds of studies and.
Yeah, we don't have many sources other than Plato, Xenophon,
and Aristophanes, and the later doxographical tradition, but which was transmission. And there's another aspect of the whole thing, and that is where the transmission differs very completely from the original set in ancient Greece. You see, philosophy, I think, was a praxis. What counted was the practical doing, what you did, right? Not what the doctrines were secondary to the praxis, to the ascesis, to the praxis. Right? Now, they all had a praxis, physical and spiritual. Plato was a wrestler. The name Platon is a wrestling name, right? The chubby one, the broad-shouldered one.
Yeah.
And Socrates was a wrestler, frequented constantly the gymnasia. Right? Wow. So, but they also had a kind of they understood philosophy as a way of life. And you see, I think the most significant philosophical act of Plato was the founding of the academy. As a spiritual home for training in philosophy, for shaping oneself as a striving for wisdom, and as a home for the sciences. Because it was the spiritual home of the various sciences, mathematical sciences and natural sciences also. And the idea of using, of course, he had a forerunner, Pythagoras. Plato, and the founding of the school too is Pythagoras, the Sangria in southern Italy. And I had a talk with Lawrence Hattap about this, why Plato would hide. One of the reasons for, I describe Plato, for me Plato is an esoteric writer. He writes esoterically, not exoterically. I mean, anybody can read the dialogue, right? The words are there. But he writes esoterically in such a way as to be most difficult of access. Only the greatest concentration, I think Strauss is absolutely right on this, with the greatest effort, you have to really make an effort to understand Plato. But it's worth it. It's an effort that is very well worth it. Right? It's a wonderful, wonderful insights there. Just so profound, so beautiful, and so contradictory. I mean, they all in the Republic, 9 books, you know. At the beginning of book 2, Socrates is given the task of figuring out what justice does to its possessor in and of itself, not what the rewards are either here or in the other life. Right? What does he do in Book 10? He tells the story of the myth of metaphysical. Now, why is that myth there? One has to figure that out. Right? How does that cohere? Yeah. It's a violation. So, no, but I think Plato is an esoteric writer, and I tried to argue with Lawrence Haddad. One of the reasons he is esoteric, number one, in order to shape the reader, but number two, in order to avoid the rage of the multitude. I mean, the fact that Socrates, whom Plato describes as the justest man of our time, was unjustly accused and executed is a big example, right? And he had the example of the persecution of the Pythagoreans in southern Italy, which was a horrible persecution.
Way before even Socrates.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, for example, Plato had Sicilian friends.
Yeah, he went to.
There was a tradition of the knowledge of how the Pythagoreans had been persecuted was horrible. Right?
Yeah.
For example, the story of the bull of Phalaris, the tyrant. Right?
Yeah.
The iron bull.
Then also Socrates, how Socrates was punished. So you are suggesting that Plato want to take a measure against society, the multitude, to come after the philosophers.
Yeah. Oh yes.
So
oh yes. Well, he says so in the what is it called, in the myth of the cave.
Yeah. Yeah.
The philosopher who comes back into the cave faces the rage of the prisoners, and he has to make an alliance with the shadow makers.
Yeah. Yeah, but how can you create a distance between the philosopher and the multitude and yet influence the society? That's
the big problem.
That's because
that's the political.
You want to legislate. You want to also legislate on the society, but you also want to keep a distance to society.
That's the big problem. The political problem of philosophy.
Yeah,
now Plato tries to solve it through the idea of the philosopher king, which only works as the indirect ruler of the ruler.
I think Professor Hodder, thank you for this session. We have to end it for now.